one of the most effective ways that you can engage your congregation and keep their attention is to do something that they may not have taught you in seminary. Preach without notes. 20 years ago, I decided that the single most important thing I could do to make my preaching better would be to preach without notes. It was hard work. I had to experiment in various ways to do this, but as a result, my preaching became more natural, more immediate, more alive. When you bring a manuscript into the pulpit, because you're wanting to make sure that you get every word just right, then you have a tendency to read parts of it. And reading is boring. Or if you bring an outline into the pulpit, or if you bring little note cards into the pulpit, every once in a while you're glancing down to look at your notes. And whenever you do that, you're breaking eye contact with the congregation, and you're breaking an emotional contact with the congregation. But if you can preach without notes, then you've got constant eye contact as you scan the congregation, as you look in people's faces, and you can respond to the facial expressions that are there. You can respond to immediately what's happening in your environment. And there's a flow, and you sound more natural, and you look more natural, and your sermon is coming out of your soul. The result is a sermon that is fresh, immediate, and live. This is such a better way of preaching that I don't know why seminaries and preaching classes don't teach all the time preaching without notes. I suppose it's just because it's hard. It takes time. You have to do it every week for a long time before it becomes natural, before it becomes comfortable for you. But when it works, and your congregation will appreciate it. This is how I do it. First of all, I write my sermons on Friday. I don't wait till Saturday night. A sermon has to live inside of you for a while. So I write it out on Friday, and I write it word for word. But I don't write it in blocks of paragraphs. Instead, I write out the sermon in an outline form. You know, an opening line, and my sublines, another opening line, sublines. And the reason I put it in outline form like that is because visually it's easier for me to remember an outline rather than blocks of paragraphs. Then on Saturday night, before I go to bed, I then take that word for word outline and I read it out loud. I read it slowly, out loud, and as I'm reading it, I am practicing how I want to say it, what tone of voice I want to use, where I want to put pauses in, what hand gestures I may want to use. And I read through it 2 times. I would suggest if you're starting out, read through it out loud 3 times. Then I put it away, I go to bed, I get a good night's sleep. In the morning when I wake up, as I'm showering, as I'm getting dressed, as I'm shaving, I then recite that sermon as well as I can remember it. And I discover something interesting. Almost all of the sermon is right there. Because while I was sleeping, my brain moved the sermon from short-term memory to long-term memory. And not only that, but my brain also edited the sermon. It took out the extra words, the repeated phrases, and it made it smoother. It maybe rearranges some of the material, so it really makes a little bit more sense. The sermon that I'm reciting in the morning is always a better sermon than the one that I was reading the night before. Now, as I'm reciting it on Sunday morning to myself, I may get stuck. I may say to myself, now what comes next? I can't remember the next thing. Fine, I go over to my manuscript, I open it up, I take a look at it. Oh, okay, after I say this, then I move to this. All right. And just that simple review solidifies it in my memory. I then go to church, I preach, I don't bring the manuscript into the pulpit, I don't want to be tempted to look at that. I preach, and I go with the flow. Now, maybe I'll forget a line. Big deal, the congregation isn't going to know that. And actually, I'll sometimes add some lines. I'll do a little rearranging on the spot. The sermon comes across in an extemporaneous way. I can suit the moment. And the result is, again, a lively, immediate, fresh experience. So, do this yourself. Practice a technique that works for you. It'll take time. It is some hard work, but it's going to pay off and your congregation is going to appreciate it. This is Ryan Algrim, joining you in your commitment to preach no more boring sermons.